Every now and then, Melissa and I get a podcast guest where we are on such a roll by the end, we just start brainstorming ways to have them back. And that is exactly how I felt today after our conversation with Tara Mohr. Tara Mohr is an expert on women's leadership and well-being, and she's an author, educator, and certified coach. Tara is the author of Playing Big, Practical Wisdom for Women Who Want to Speak Up, Create, and Lead, published by Penguin Random House and named a Best Book of the Year by Apple's iBooks. This is the book we're going to talk about today. You're really going to enjoy it, and especially as a homeschooler, because, by the way, you can't homeschool without playing big. Tara is the creator of the global Playing Big Leadership Program and Playing Big Facilitators Training for coaches, mentors, and managers who support others in their personal and professional growth. Tara's work has been featured on The Today Show and in publications ranging from the New York Times to Goop to Harvard Business Review. She lives in San Francisco and loves dance, art, and long walks with her family. Oh, and by the way, Tara homeschools her kids. We're going to talk about all that and more. Please join me in welcoming Tara Mohr to the Brave Writer Podcast. Well, how about that? It is so great to have you here, Tara Mohr, with your book, Playing Big, as the focus of today's conversation. Yay!
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And this is exciting for me because Julie was such a big mentor from afar in my own life and homeschooling journey and still is. So this is a real treat.
Oh gosh, I love that. I loved your book and I can't wait to leap into this discussion. Get it? Leap?
Yeah, yes.
There we go. We're going to start leaping.
Melissa and I already talked about your book separate from this interview the last week when we were doing an episode about our 25th anniversary for Brave Writer, which is January of 2025. And Melissa was like, Julie, I feel like you've been playing big for a while. And so as I was reading, I was just noticing how many of those principles have actually been active in Brave Writer from the beginning. And I felt like you just did such a great job of distilling what it means to be a woman who's willing to take a risk. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, let us know what made you write this book and what you hope women will take away from it. And then we'll go into the more deep divey chapter stuff.
Yeah. Well, it's really a few different threads that kind of got braided together that led to the book. I grew up in a very unique house where my mom had books on the shelves from every spiritual tradition around the world. And she was super interested in psychology. And so we were always talking about our unconscious minds and our dream analysis and what did Freud say and what did Jung from a very young age.
Love that.
So I had this kind of lens I was raised with about how do our inner lives affect our outer lives and what's happening with people psychologically. And I was always really interested in and passionate about that. And after a little bit of career wandering, as many of us do, that led me to get interested in coaching. And I started this small coaching practice. I had another full-time job at the time, but sort of friends of friends, in the hours after work and early morning and weekends, I would see these handful of clients. And this pattern showed up really quickly, which was that all my clients were people that I immediately could see were brilliant women. And they're brilliant women in the ways that you guys are brilliant women, in the way that our listeners, your friends and your dear neighbors, right? Like just great ideas, conscientious, caring human beings, hardworking. And yet, what I would hear in these coaching sessions was these same women would always be saying, well, if that was a good idea, someone else would have thought of it. Or, I remember being on a walk with one friend and she just listed on the walk, like, here are the 9 things our school board really needs to do. And it was so good. And I'm like, are you going to run? And she's like, oh no, I'm not going to run for the school board. So it was like that kind of thing over and over again. And I always feel we're only interested in the questions and issues we're grappling with ourselves. Like if it's a done deal for us, we're not really interested. And I was this young woman who had kind of done everything by the book. I had always been a good student, getting good grades, was getting good feedback in my job. And yet I found none of that is adding up to any kind of confidence or risk taking at all. I feel so frozen and timid.
Wow.
And so I was really interested in like, what's that all about and how are we going to change it? Because one, I want these women to know their brilliance, but also like, I want to live in a world that is run, at least 50% of it is run by these people. And that's not going to happen if we don't get over this stuff. Yeah.
Oh gosh, I found so much of what you wrote about overcoming self-doubt and how to step into your full potential really compelling. And the whole way through, as I'm reading this book, I'm evaluating myself, right? I'm noticing ways that, okay, I've played big in this way. Oh, this is a way I totally play small. So, like, what are the first steps that people can take when they feel held back by fear or by self-limiting beliefs? Why do we play small?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the first thing I want to say about that is that there's nothing wrong with you if you end up playing small. The cultural tidal wave, it's like a tidal wave force towards that. And I was thinking when I saw that question, Melissa, I was remembering when I first did my coaching training, there was a quote from the founder of the particular coaching school I went to, Karen Kimsey House. And the quote was basically like, to live an authentic life is an incredibly courageous act.
Yes. Yes.
You don't have to go skydiving or start a big company or, do some dramatic departure from your family to have done something really brave, like right, brave writer, like just to show up with your own voice and find a way to use your gifts and do the non-conforming that will ask of you and have the self-trust that will demand of you. That is hard. And all the momentum from culture is in an opposite direction.
I absolutely love that you used the word self-trust, hyphenated word. This morning, I was reflecting on the fact that a lot of times women only act as a reaction. So they want to justify a decision they make based on a previous condition. So let's say someone wants a divorce. They have to build up a list of acceptable social reasons. They have to demonize the partner and the entirety of their marriage in order to just take that brave step to say, actually, I just want something different. I just want a life that's not that life. There's sort of this lack of self-trust. It's like a performance that we're constantly being called on to make. So if we're going to take a leap into, like, let's say I have a talent and I want to start an Etsy store, so often we're looking for an antecedent event instead of self-trust. Like, what legitimizes my right to open this store and charge money for my thing? I have an example from a friend of mine. She's a fabulous artist. And we all kept pressuring her, please have art classes for our kids. Please have art classes for our kids. Finally, she's like, okay, I'm going to do a summer camp. It's going to be 4 hours a day. We'll do it for 2 weeks and I'll charge $25 a child. And we were like, no. We are paying you more than that. That makes zero sense. And she said, but women don't have money and they don't have permission to spend money. And I was like, okay, that limiting belief is something you made up. Maybe it's in your marriage, but it's not true in everybody's. And it was just fascinating. So when you say self-trust, let's dive into that a little bit. How do we get that foundation where we don't have to blame someone else or get someone else's permission to act in our own best interest?
Yeah. Well, I love that you're going there because it also pushes us to the question, when we say self-trust, one of the next questions we could ask is, which self? Because right, when we go self-trust, we're like, but I know, well, I'm the person that accidentally gets too, short with my kids sometimes, or I made that really bad decision once, or, I'm the compulsive shopper. You telling me I'm supposed to trust that me? And so the which self, right? Meaning there's different parts of us. And so we can say, when I'm activated by fear, when I'm triggered, when I'm operating out of a limiting belief, that's not what we're talking about, but we are starting to name, and this is a big part of the playing big work, to say there is that deeper, wiser self in all of us that is worthy of our trust. And that's the self that is your deep knowings. It's the self of your gifts. It's the self of your desire to contribute. It's the self that wants to feel more free, more joyful, live in a more loving existence. And that self is really worthy of our trust. And the other thing I'll say about that self-trust can be scary because sometimes we think it means, well, if I trust that part of me, then I have to follow all of its directions immediately. And then that means upending my life.
Oh my gosh. What a great insight. That's really true. When people say things like, how did you know when to leave your marriage? Or how did you know when to put your kids in public school after homeschooling or whatever? A lot of times what I'm hearing from people is, I think I know that's the outcome I want, but I'm so not ready to do it. Right?
Yes.
And so
Yes.
that's a really great way to frame it, that there are sort of steps in the direction of self-trust. It's not a tomorrow I move out or tomorrow I end this process that I'm in. That's
Yes.
really good.
It can be such a gentle, like, I have no idea what we're going to do about that yet, self, but I do hear you. Like, I hear the message, or I'm aware of this dream. I have no idea how we could possibly achieve it, but let me at least stop playing the skeptic in relationship to my own dreams. Maybe I could be the ally, even if I don't know. And that's really, the definition
Beautiful.
of playing big that I evolved to, that's in the book and in the courses, is playing big is being more loyal to our dreams than our fears.
Oh.
And so the loyalty doesn't mean you have to take action on everything already. It doesn't mean you had to achieve your dreams to be playing big, but it's like, what's your stance? And I know for me, and this goes to education. If our education is only teaching us how to pull apart arguments and find the hole in what's wrong with it, we will do that with ourselves. And a lot of us come out of education. And for me, I came out of, college and then grad school, and all of that emphasis on sort of the argumentative, highly cerebral, logical education, going, well, if I have a dream or an inspiration, the first responsible thing to do is pick it apart.
Yeah.
And we don't learn the nurturing of ourselves and the same way we would grow a seedling. We have to be in relationship to our own longings that way.
Gosh, that is so true. I have rejected the value of grades as a measurement of worth for my kids. But the way I grade myself is absolutely like still going down the report card checklist from third grade, I love that you use this phrase, our deep knowings, like to listen to and to trust our deep knowings. It strikes me that there's times when I have listened to that voice and known, like, I need to push forward on this. Often it's been on behalf of my kids, and the places where I'm more inclined to be meek or like fatally patient, which is one of the things that I kept thinking of. Julie's dying laughing because she knows I was waiting a long time for an answer on a very important thing as I'm reading this book and thinking, gosh, I'm being so patient waiting for this answer. Like, what would it look like to play big?
Yeah.
In this one instance.
Yeah. And was that the good girl? Like, I don't want to bother them. That kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I don't want to be a pain. I don't want to inconvenience. I mean, all of that. It is the good girl thing. And maybe we could jump to that because you raised some really interesting points about the ways that school trains us. And I think especially girls toward a certain type of behavior. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. Well, that started for me, that whole interest in that started because in those same early coaching clients, I had this one client who had just always been the superstar in school, straight A student. And then she was in this senior consulting role for a consulting company. And the culture of the company and the nature of the job was just that, like, the partners would sort of like beat each other up. That was how they did feedback. It was really tough. It was really challenging. And it was the first time she had really run into like sort of being in the middle of the pack, the average in the crowd. And it just became clear how her good student and the sort of I always got the gold stars was creating this really big wall that she hit. And at the same time, I had this other client that had gotten no academic support from her parents and had like always been a C student. And she was just kind of like knocking down all these walls in her career. And I, as someone who basically was raised with the narrative, like school is practice for career. If you do well in school, that will equal doing well in your career. I was intrigued by that. And I was starting to see more and more counter examples. So obviously, I don't want to overstate that. There's lots of privilege that comes with doing well in education. There's lots we learn that we use, from executive function to writing skills. But here are some of the things that I started to notice more and more, seeing then more clients and working also with larger groups where you could just see these patterns in such large numbers. There were these gaps between what the skills we hone and that we're conditioned in school and then what we need in our careers. So one is in traditional school, and you can think about in your homeschooling, how is this dynamic playing out or not? But certainly in traditional school, the student is encouraged to please everybody, please all the teachers, get all the A's. And if your history teacher one semester thinks a good history paper is written this way, you write it that way. And then you get a new teacher next year who has a different idea of what a good, and you be the chameleon. So we produce chameleons who suss out what the authority figure wants and provides it. And what I saw in my coaching practice is like, that is okay to get you a certain degree of advancement in your career. There's a period where maybe your boss is happy to have a chameleon. But then people start asking you for an opinion and a point of view and a strong stance and the ability to push back against what an authority figure is doing. Or your boss is saying, push back against me. Like I need some critique and something different or some challenge here. So that's one big area of gap. A second one is that school tends to really focus on training students to prepare for whatever is being asked of them. Study for the test. Here's the day you're going to be asked to write the paper. And our careers demand a ton of improvisation. And I cannot tell you how many adults, especially women, because it sort of combines with the good girl thing and a kind of our good girl coping mechanisms. How many women are like, I can't do that stretch thing because they might ask me a question I don't know the answer to. I can't do that thing because now this role is big and complex enough that like things are starting to feel out of control. Whereas that straight A student, especially as the girl, she's basically feeling very in control. And then the last one I'll mention is in school, we can generally do good work and get the good grades. And in our careers, we have to do good work and make it visible to the right stakeholders. And that is very hard for women because self-promotion makes us cringe. We don't want to be like that. We don't have to do it as self-promotion, but we do have to find ways to make our good work visible, whether to our audience or to our industry, or if we're in a big company, to the people who need to know about it. And that is a real stuck place for a lot of women.
Happy New Year. Let's take a minute to take a look at what's happening in Brave Writer in the beginning of 2025. First of all, I am super pumped. I have a brand new book coming out in April. That is my fourth book with Tarcher Perigee, and this one is called Help! My Kid Hates Writing. And I'm really hoping that this book sort of distills the principles you need to help that struggling student become a brave writer. Cover reveal is on Instagram and will also be in an email coming to an inbox near you soon. Thanks for supporting my writing over the years, and I really hope that this book meets a need that you have. Secondly, we have launched a brand new venture on Substack called Brave Learning with Julie Bogart. Many of you have asked me to get on Substack, and we've finally got it put together. The very first series of posts is focused on that re-upping energy you need for the new year in your homeschool. You can subscribe by heading to the link in our show notes. This Substack will also include our weekly free writing prompts for your kids. And then I'm hoping that you will share some of those free writes in the comments section so that you can start reading the work of your own children and other children. We will also focus on themes related to parenting and awesome adulting in addition to education and writing. And there will be weekly links or reminders to tune into this podcast. Some of the content will be public and free, but if you like to be a commenter or you want access to all the content, please consider subscribing. It helps support Brave Writer when you do, and I'm very much looking forward to developing a sense of community over there. And then third and last, our winter-spring classes are open for registration. Some sessions are already sold out. That's always what happens in December, but there are plenty more with openings. If you'd like to have support in teaching writing as we kick off 2025, sign up for one of our award-winning writing classes now. See the link in our show notes for registration information. Above all, thank you for supporting Brave Writer, for supporting the work I do. You make it possible for us to keep providing you with what you need to feel good about your homeschool. And now let's go back to the podcast. So I found all of those incredibly fascinating. The preparation versus improvisation jumped out at me the most. I think I'm actually somewhat good at both. I think what we need with women is knowing when to prepare and when to improvise, right? Like maybe that's a little bit to help some people who are terrified of improv. Just know preparation helps you be a better improvisational person. One of the things that I've seen when people are trying to start the mom shop of her homeschool curriculum she wants to sell or whatever, they'll get a good idea and launch out on it, but then stop the research and iterating process. Yes. Improvisation for me means that I'm willing to keep improving the thing that I've got. So I start with sort of a prototype and a hunch, but then it's very responsive and dynamic. And I'm not afraid at all of criticism. In fact, when we get feedback from Brave Writer, one of the jokes is if one person says it, Julie's already changing the product. And we've had to hold me back a little bit to realize that one person isn't like the sum total of everyone. But it's that willingness to iterate and to do the necessary research to improve while you're improvising, right? I was telling Melissa, when I started to write my core manual, back then it was called The Writer's Jungle, I actually assembled a group of 40 families who would read the chapters and actually do the activities and give me feedback to make sure that my instructions made sense, that the writing was what I was looking for as a result. And then I would give them writing feedback to see if my advice would improve the child's writing. So we had this reciprocal relationship. It was very much improvisational. I made it up every week as I went. I didn't know what each week would be until I was doing it, and I took their feedback as guidance. But I did learn something very interesting, and I wanted to hear your comment on this because I think it's in your book. So it was very supportive and interesting, and I did learn a lot, but a lot of their feedback was not valuable because they don't know writing. They know what their feelings are about what I was offering, but there was actually only one person out of 40 who was a writer who could actually give me meaningful feedback on my writing. So when you talk about all of these pieces together, what was occurring to me is there has to be a certain level of insight that you bring to the thing, like enough baseline skill that you can evaluate the relevance and meaning of the input that you get and the iterating you do. Is that true?
100%, 100%. Yeah. So I love that you're bringing up all of this. And I think this is a great example of what you were talking about, of how you've been living these principles in Brave Writer. And what happens for so many women when they have an idea, and this could be, for the moms listening, if you're thinking of an entrepreneurial idea, or you're just thinking of organizing the community fair, and it's a new project in your town, that our whole good girl thing is, I have to get it perfect and I have to do it all. That's actually like a coping mechanism that girls and women develop to feel more secure in this world that doesn't always embrace us and our voices. But it doesn't actually help. And what Julie's talking about of like being a little bit more improvisational, showing people the early versions of things, getting out there in the trenches with your audience and letting that iteratively shape the work. Like, I just can't stress enough how we have to switch our definition from like the awesome creator entrepreneur is the one who's willing to do that process, not the one who somehow intuits exactly how the thing is supposed to be. Nobody can do that. And, you know, I live in the Bay Area and it always amazes me because in Silicon Valley, it's like, we have this term, you know, in the tech world that's product market fit. You're trying to find the fit between your product and your market. And the most professional startup people take for granted that that's going to take a couple years. And then they get millions of dollars to spend to do it.
That's
and
true.
I'm like, if they can grant themselves that, we with our little small shops are allowed to have some, you know, rounds of figuring it out.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I got to stop you because we can apply that to homeschool. Like the
100%.
mom who gets this perfect plan in place and she's delivering it to her children, they're the market. But is it a fit? And I always say year 1 looks like school. Year 2, you're like, now I don't know what to do. Year 3, you're just starting to see what fits. And so those first several years can be just very scary if you thought you were supposed to get it right on day 1.
Right. There's another, well, it's funny. It reminds me, there's another popular quote here that is, no business plan survives first contact with customers. So we could say the same thing. No curriculum plan survives the first week of school. Maybe it survives the first day, and then we muscle through because we're like, that's the model we know from school is that was just the plan. Even though if all the students are, you know, falling out of their chairs with boredom, it's still the plan. So yes. And then to go to the second part of what you're saying, this is where it's interesting and tricky to gather feedback. And one way to think of it is when you're watching people react to your idea, or you're watching your students in your home react to the curriculum, or you're watching your customers, you know, react to your offering, you're observing that. It's more like you're observing them and interpreting what you're observing through your lens of expertise and insight. So you're not asking your customer, how should I change this curriculum? But you might ask them, did you make it all the way through?
Yes. Right. Yes.
So you're interpreting, and really, if you can observe the behavior of the audience you want to reach, that's always better than asking them for direction.
100%. What do they say? They say your customers can show you the problem, but they can never show you the solution. That's true with your kids. You can't ask your kids to tell you how to learn math better, but you can tell they don't like how they're learning it now. So you just keep iterating. You keep looking. Oh, I see. This child is fidgeting the whole time. Maybe I need to use their body when I'm teaching math and not just make them sit still, right? But your child isn't going to say, I'm a kinesthetic learner. Please give me activities.
Exactly. Well, they might. I mean, I have to say that's one of the benefits of homeschooling. They're generally not. Although I do think it's interesting when, you know, with all the empowerment they get from homeschooling, when they go, I'd like a 5 to 6 week break from this subject. And you're like, okay, let's try that and see what happens. Like very specific. You have something in mind there. Yeah.
I love that.
As I'm listening to both of you about this, it strikes me that all writing is improvisation.
Yes.
Like you're literally making it up as you go. Yeah. And so Julie, thinking about Brave Writer, the like improvisation is baked in to that experience. And then I feel like parenting is flying by the seat of your pants and figuring it out in the moment. Like we were saying, you make plans, you try to have good scaffolding, but then they wake up and the day is different. So I love this whole, first of all, the piece of like thinking about how we interact with our kids in relation to feedback and decision making. how to iterate, what
Yeah.
to try next,
Yeah.
or when we need to try something, applying that to other parts of our lives, how we interact with the adults in our lives. I love that. I also loved everything that you were saying about visibility. Tara,
Oh, yeah.
to jump back to that for just a second, I suddenly had, because that, oh my gosh, as a writer, as a novelist, like
Yeah.
I can talk about books, other people's books, until I'm blue in the face. It is my favorite thing to do. And I am so great at promoting other people's books, telling the world about them in a way that makes the world want to read those books. But then my books, I'm very hesitant. I don't like to do it. It feels uncomfortable. And I suddenly, as you were talking, I had this flash on this border of flowers that I planted in my front yard. And it just like went bananas, and all summer and fall, just flowers spilling over this concrete wall and just advertising themselves to the neighborhood. And people would stop me. We just moved in a year ago, so this was like their first their first visibility. And I thought, oh, people like around the neighborhood talking to me about those flowers and how much they appreciate them. And then I had like giving seeds away, and it's spreading, right? And I thought, oh, right, okay, visibility. I need to think like those flowers are not embarrassed. They're doing what they're supposed to do. So I really appreciate that your work and your book is coaching women to not be afraid to like put ourselves out there in big ways and in small ways. It could be a little change of speaking to one person about one small thing, or it could be a huge way, like Julie launching a business. It's a really important message. And I love that we came around to talking about kids and the application in homeschooling too. Like, I would really love to hear a little bit about your family's journey toward homeschooling and how your coaching practice around leadership and well-being like influenced you to make that decision.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we were in a way, well, I don't want to say we were accidental homeschoolers, because now it feels like so meant to be and we couldn't imagine it any other way, but it was not on our radar. And I was listening to a parenting podcast that I listened to from time to time with Janet Lansbury. And I literally just accidentally, the episode I press play on, had a homeschooling mom. And I found the vision that she described like so compelling and interesting. It was the first sort of more progressive, intellectual picture of homeschooling I'd ever heard. And I shared the episode with my husband. I'm not sure what I was thinking, because I shared it and I still hadn't had the thought that we would ever possibly do that. I was like, this is so interesting. And he, I think, texted me back and said, wait, we could do that? And then I was like, wait, we could do that? Like, it didn't even occur to me. And at that time, our oldest child was coming up on the kindergarten year. And we had been looking at all kinds of options, and just like nothing was resonating with us. And then this really resonated with us. And so we sort of tentatively said, like, okay, we'll take it a year at a time and see. I think a lot of different things about it continue to really resonate with us. And in terms of, my coaching practice and how that fits in, essentially I'm working with people in adulthood where they're now having to re-ask and re-look at, like, who am I really? Where did that get covered up or forced to be repressed along the way? What are my real strengths? What are my real gifts? What do I want apart from all the shoulds that I've internalized? And how do I also kind of find my own intrinsic motivation again and trust in my own creative processes? And I think for both my husband and I mean, I felt like I really lost that in school and had to come back to it. I think for him, it was more like he would have wanted just so much more agency with his own independent learning. And we both felt that the social dynamics of school were probably not the most nourishing for our beings.
Mm.
And so that was a concern for us too. And having my oldest is a boy. Now I have 3 boy and 2 girls, but also for him, I was very clear I did not want a boy that became armored up.
Mm.
I wanted a boy. I felt that part of my responsibility as a mother was to preserve his innate connection to his own heart and emotions. And I was seeing that armoring up happening, especially for boys. I had read about how it happens, starts to happen, especially in that early transition to school. So that was another big piece for us, for sure. And then I would say as the years have evolved, there's so many other pieces. Maybe one more thing I'd say is that because my husband and I had both been entrepreneurs and working from home for about a decade. And so the idea that you would go to one room all week just because you were a kid did not make sense to us. We were like, we loved switching up. We're doing our same job every day, but we love switching up how we do it and where we do it, and that it can include travel and different experiences. And also and this is something Julie's work has really reinforced for me, like we in our adult lives had chosen, and we're so grateful for these careers where we could like respect our bodies a little bit, even just a little bit. Like some days are, we're going to peel off early because we need to rest. And some days we're going to get a slower start. And why wouldn't I really wanted that for my children too. And not to have to constantly overrule the needs of the body because of a rigid structure. So those were some of our initial like big points of inspiration and pull.
One of the things that struck me while you were talking is that the principles that you use to coach adults are so much more easily achieved with children who are homeschooled. Right?
Exactly.
Like they can already start that journey of self-trust, of having a say, of improvisation, experimentation. I've told these stories millions of times about my own children, but I'm repeatedly impressed by the memory of my kids, the things that they took the risk to try, whether it was raising their own funds to do an activity or joining into an adult dance troupe as children, like without any hesitation or fear. One of my sons, when he finally decided to go to high school, became close friends with a teacher he didn't even have so that he could read American short stories at lunch with her once a week. These are initiative-taking kids because somewhere along the way, they understood from the home education environment that life is improvisation, that you can have the things that you want if you go seek out the resources to help them occur. You don't have to just be a good girl and hope to qualify yourself. You can actually go ahead and take the initiative to create the life that you want. Are you finding that with your kids?
Very much so. And I would say that, I guess, my belief is that kind of initiative is actually natural and inherent to us if it doesn't get, if we don't internalize messages that tell us there's something wrong. And so it's like, of course, because human beings have interests, like, oh, that teacher over there looks interesting and that dance troupe looks fun. And if nobody's told me I'm not supposed to, or I can't, or it's embarrassing, or it's weird, or nobody else is doing it, right, then I'll go do those things. And I think, as a parent, I always feel like at least 50% of my job is protecting what my kids came in with. To the extent that I'm trying to cultivate things, I just see that as so much in balance with how do we allow what's already there? Because I think we do come in with some imprint of the passions and the gifts and the desire for the joy and fun of being engaged with the world, right?
Yeah.
Hey, Melissa here. Julie and I enjoyed our conversation with Tara Mohr so much, and it covered so much ground that we decided to break it into 2 episodes. So please join us next week for part 2 of Playing Big with Tara Mohr.
You've been listening to the Brave Writer Podcast. I'm Julie Bogart, and Melissa Wiley is my co-host. This podcast is produced by Nova Media with support from team member Jeanette Hall. Thank you for listening and for leaving either a starred or written review on the podcast app of your choice. Anytime you do that, you bring a lot of joy to the team and you support our work. So thanks in advance.